Hi, Lizzie here. Today I'm going to show you how to make Joel, or Joel, whichever way you want to say it. It's Joel, J-O-E-L, and it's a Christmas table runner. It's part of our Christmas in July series. Behind me you'll see our Santa gnome, which is the other part. So Joel is a table runner with just this pleated fabric folded effect on the centre panel, and really that's the only perhaps tricky bit of the whole thing. The rest of it is straight stitching, very easy quilting. I'm going to take you through every single stage of this one. I've done quite a bit of this machining already because it's lots of strip piecing. It's nothing to be frightened of. It's just a case of machining strips together and then folding one end over. That is it. So nothing complicated at all, but it does look nice. These folds you can press these so that perhaps they're more in the middle or more to one side. They kind of find their own level, so it doesn't matter how much I press them, they will find their own way. And of course they get altered as you put things on them, but they are rather gorgeous. So this is Joel, and this is our, like I said, this is one of our Christmas projects for July, and if I hold it out like that, you can see it's a fairly decent size. It will fit on I would say a medium-sized table, perfect for Christmas morning, or actually just through the festive period. Now, interestingly, in this video, I'm going to make one using just regular fabric, because I was looking at this the other day, and I think it would make the most amazing floor mat. We don't normally have quilts, I don't think, as a floor mat, but I looked at it and I thought, you know what, a children's play mat, because it's textural, I thought that'd be quite fun. So I'm using a really gorgeous fabric with elephants on, and you can see I've done a little bit of my strip piecing already. I haven't folded it over, I thought I'd wait to show you. So the first thing we're going to do is actually sew those strips together on we're going to add to this, in other words. So let's go to the side camera. So a lot of this today will be about more technique and how we do things, rather than you sitting here for 2 or 3 hours watching me go through, make a whole quilt or whole topper or whole mat or whatever you want to call it. So we're going to take just one end of the piece that I've already made. If I show you on the side cam, you can see what that looks like. In fact, I'm going to start from that end, which is where I finished the other day. And you can see that all my elephants are going the same way. So be aware that if you're using directional fabric, you may well want everything to go one way, or maybe you want to sort of do alternate. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just be aware that if you've got directional fabric, that you need to think about the direction it's going in. So each piece, and you'll have background strips like this, okay, and you'll have top strips, if you like, that's what I've called it in the pattern, that are doubled over, so they're folded, so you've got a nice folded edge, and that's obviously the edge that we see running along here. So what you need to do is you need to sandwich a strip, a folded top strip, on top of your background strip. You need to get this right. You need to get this really accurate. So you can see I'm placing that really well on my raw edge there, and then you're going to put a strip over the top. Now, top tip, and I say this in the pattern, make sure that all of your top edges are absolutely as parallel, if you like, as you can possibly get it. That one's a little bit off because it was a little bit of a selvage. We don't have much to cut away, and the reason for that is I've ensured this project comes out of a ½ meter of fabric. If you buy more fabric, you can cut your strips longer and you've got a little bit of wriggle room, but we haven't got much for trimming back. Try and get this folded edge to sit on that seam. So there's the seam from the previous one there, and ideally that fold is going to be right on that seam. Okay, so we can marry that up like that. To be honest, I think because the fabrics are twisted, you know, the pleats are twisted, it's not really going to be crucial. And if you're out just a millimetre, which you can see that one's out a millimetre, I really wouldn't worry. The main thing is to get this this top edge, don't worry about the bottom, this top edge as perfect as you can get. So then you're putting your top strip or your background strip over the top, you're making a sandwich. So you've got, and there's a picture of this in the pattern, you've got your underneath background strip, you've got your folded top strip next, and then you've got your background fabric strip over the top of that, and you're making a sandwich, and all of these raw edges are sitting together, and that's what you're going to stitch. So we're doing a 1/4 inch, so I'm going to adjust my machine to a 1/4 inch stitch. If you have that facility, fantastic. If you don't, then obviously you can use a 1/4 inch foot or piece of tape, you know, all the little tricks and gadgets and gizmos that we know and love. So you're just coming down here. I'm going super speedy. I could increase my stitch length a little bit. Regular stitch length of 2.4 is fine. I've gone up a little bit because then it machines it that little bit more quickly for you. And we're just doing that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Be as accurate as you can all the way down. You don't worry about a back stitch, no need. So there's our next piece attached. You can see my elephants are going in the right direction, and there's my next background piece. So we'll do that again. Just make sure my elephants are the right way up. And because this is directional fabric, I haven't worried about whether I've got a whole elephant on my strip or a part of an elephant. You know what, by the time, like I said before, by the time you've twisted all of these strips over, you're really not going to be worried about it. If you're really sort of concerned about that, you know, with your own ability and your own idiosyncrasies, let's say, if that's the sort of thing that's going to be important to you. But you will use more fabric if you try to get, for instance in this case, the elephants all going down the centre of your folded piece. So just be aware of that. It's not crucial. I don't think it's crucial. You may. And so you're just doing that 1/4 inch. And as I said, don't worry about the bottom, because it's the bottom piece we're going to trim first to get that absolutely straight. We want it ideally to end at 10.5 inches wide from top to bottom when we're finished. But you know what, if you're out just a little bit, I really don't want you to worry about it. You know, these are just lovely projects for you to sit and enjoy and not to get over anxious about. So there we are. This is the last piece we're doing now, and I'm just making sure that my top is still as level as I can get it. You can see, otherwise you'll end up with a banana because there's so many seams and so much stitching and so many pieces. There's 30 in total. You could easily end up with the whole thing stretching into a banana. So I want you to be just cautious of that. I don't want you to worry about it. All these things can be used, I'm sure. It's absolutely fine. So right down the bottom, and we're going to cut. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press all these over. So all of the seams on the back, I want you to have a look, all the seams on the back are going the same way. So I'm going to finish pressing this piece, and then I'm going to prepare for pinning the twists over. I'm going to trim and then twist. Okay, so I'll be back to you shortly. So just a quick overview of me cutting my piece, my folded piece. Trying not to get that flash for you. I'm using, the top edge is as straight can be. So it's really just the bottom edge here that we need to trim. That's the edge I said don't worry about. We'll trim that. As long as this is as best as you can get, this is the edge really that we want to trim. And it's quite obvious that you've got a top and a bottom, and the bottom can be quite jiggedy-jaggedy where the fabric has moved. I don't want you to worry about that. We're going to trim it away. Now we're going to trim it back to 10.5 inches. That's what it says in the pattern. So all I'm going to do is get my ruler, and I'm sorry if this flashes, and I'm going to line up the edge of my piece on the 10.5 inch line here, and I'm just going to trim this away. So you can see a fair old chunk gets cut off on this side, and that's brilliant because that keeps everything neat. So I shall continue cutting this. I'll get back to you. So now it's trimmed, we need to push all those pleats on one side only over so they twist. So if we look on the overhead here, I've already done quite a bit of it. Now you don't have to pin all this. I have, because quite honestly it means you don't have to worry about which way the pleats are going. All I suggest you do is concentrate on keeping this back seam, these back pleats going the same way. So you might want to machine to make sure that those pleats go that way as you machine. With this one we're pinning them so they're all already in place. So you're literally taking a little strip there, and this is the top strip, that's the folded one, and you're literally pinning it in place. What you really want to do is to get it so these cut edges here, the raw edges here, are sitting parallel, so they're sitting dead on top of each other. It would be easy to do that. It would be easy to do that, and that's not what we want. We want that cut edge to be parallel with the cut edge underneath. So as long as you've cut that with your rotary cutter and ruler, etc., really well and neat, and everything's lovely and straight, you shouldn't have any problems with this at all. So again, just fold over, get a pin, and you might think, gosh, that's a huge amount of pins. Well, it is, it's 30 pins, but it's worth it. Yeah, you may want to hand baste this as you go. We're going to machine baste it now, so to hold all of this in place, and it's a slow process because we want to catch each one of the pleats correctly, and ideally we're going to keep these back seams all going that way. Okay, so for instance it would be easier to stitch from this side, taking those seams all the way down. I'll let you decide for yourselves how you want to stitch this, but as long as you've got everything going the same way, you're fine. Now you don't really need to stitch, to pin these down, but I would definitely baste all of these pleats down. So we're going to do that first. I'm going to work against the pleats, if you like, because I'm going to start here and I'm going to come down my fabric. So I need to make sure that all of those pleats stay flat as I get to them. So pinning is good, but I can use my stiletto to make sure that all of those pleats are held in place as I bring my machine down. The alternative is to come, like I said before, is to come from the back, and you're working against your seams here. You can see there's the seam sticking up there, but your pleats are flat. So I'll let you decide which is more comfortable for you, either making sure your seams stay upright or your pleats stay upright. You know, the choice is yours. So I'll do a little bit so you can see how to do it, and then I'll continue off camera as I usually do. So we're going to baste about 1/8 of an inch. This time I'm taking my 1/4 inch mark off. I'm just going to go for my regular needle in the center position, and we're doing, like I said, about 1/8 of an inch. I'm just making sure, I'm just going to get my stiletto now, I'm just going to make sure that all of these pleats are staying flat. And because we've got one side twisted, you know, you might find that they want to twist a little bit. If they're not meeting that seam, you know, they're a millimetre out, you know, we're all prone to stitching differently and cutting differently, all of those things. I really wouldn't worry about it. Like I say, once you've twisted this, you can see how that's starting to look. You know what, you're not going to notice if you're a little bit out here and there. I don't want you to ever worry about your sewing. I really don't. You know, we're not sort of, I don't know, I was going to say professional. I'd like to think I am kind of professional, but you know, I don't want you to aspire to be sort of a top quality stitcher. I want you just to enjoy it. That's the fun of stitching. It's up to me to try and guide you to get to be the best of where you can be. It's such a personal thing. We're all at different levels. Depends how long you've been stitching, doesn't it? And it depends on your natural aptitude as well. We're not all born natural stitchers. We have to learn. And I read somewhere it said even the most professional stitchers had to make their first stitch at some point, and that's true. That is so true. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm just using my stiletto point just to hold that in place. I'm not going anywhere near the needle, but I'm making sure that it's staying flat. Underneath, the seams are all running beautifully flat as well, which is how I want them to be. So it's all working to my advantage at the moment. So I'll finish this, I'll do a little bit of the other, and then the other side where the pins are, and that really will be a slow process, so I don't want you to sit and watch that. You'd be bored to death. So just cut the thread, and you can see how that looks. Okay, so everything is caught as best as I can. I'm not fretting about it. It looks absolutely gorgeous. But the other side, as you can see, are twisted. So let's just get that into shot so you can see. So again, we're working against our pleats there. There we go, see better now. So I'm going to start stitching at the top and come down. I'm going to use my stiletto again. And I'm just going to make sure that my seams are lying flat as well. So this time my seams are going up and my pleats are going up. So it's a lot to think about. Okay, so let's start with that. And obviously we'll take the pins out as we go. So you're doing about 1/8 of an inch. I'll do a little bit and then I'll come back to you. So pins out as you go, stiletto at the ready. Take your time. You can see I'm not rushing this at all. Please don't stitch over your pins. And just make sure that seam is going up. And this is where if you pressed your seams well underneath, you know, with a hot steam, you know, best press, that sort of thing, those pleats should stay exactly where you pressed them. So again, take the pin out. You can see it's quite a laborious process. It's fiddly because of those seams. Let's just make sure that's going under. I think that is. I don't think I pressed that very well. I think this was the part that I just did before. And there we go. Right, so I'll leave it there. So what we're doing, you can see how that fabric is looking now. It's looking twisted. It's flat at the top here, which is where we've just done. If I move my machine over a little bit, you can see that's what we just did before, and this is what we're doing now, and you can see I'm twisting as I go. So I'll finish this whole length off and I'll come back to you. So I have stitched both sides of my table runner now. That's both long sides, twisting one side over, leaving the other side as it was, and you end up with this effect which is gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. But it's not difficult to get to that stage, really not difficult. Now the rest of the table runner is super easy. I'm going to still talk you through it. The first set of borders we put on are mitered corners, because they're quite wide pieces, and I think the wider pieces really benefit from being a mitered corner. So I'm going to show you how I do my mitered corners. So the first thing we're going to do is, if we look on the overhead, let's just get this out of the way. is we're going to put our short pieces on. Well, it doesn't matter which piece you put on first, to be perfectly honest. So I'll take one of the short pieces here. Now, when you look at it, you'll think, my goodness me, this is only 10.5 inches wide, and yet the piece I'm cutting is enormous. We want it to be at least the width of the other border as we come in. So if I bring in a second piece of fabric, also this is directional, I'm going to talk to you about that in a sec. So our second border will go here, or the other border will go there. And then if we look at, get another piece in, you'll see, okay, that's starting to look quite a big wide piece. So when we place our first piece down again, actually it doesn't look so bad. We need to miter all these corners. Now, you could be absolutely precise with your cutting if you want to. I've given you a little bit of a leeway each end. I think that's really important that I give you that little bit of leeway, and you'll see as we go along why I've done that, because you know, you're not all super duper experienced stitchers. You're perhaps a beginner. I don't want any beginners to be put off by this process. It's dead easy. So we'll take these two away so you're not confused. Now, because this is directional fabric, we've got little lions on here, little elephants, birds, all sorts. It's really super pretty. I want my border fabric to face out. Okay, so all of my borders will face out. If you do it the other way around, where your fabric is facing in, I suppose your eye is drawn in, which maybe that's what you want to do, but I much prefer it that all of the borders are facing the person. So if there's a person sat here or here or here, then they're going to see this gorgeous pattern in the fabric. So that's important to me. So how I do this is I fold my border piece in half. I'll give it a little finger press. So we've got a little bit of a crease. Now you're not perhaps not be able to see that, but I can see it. I could put a pen mark on it if it makes it easier for you to see. There we go. It's a heat erasable pen. And then you need to find the center of that. So all we're going to do is fold that over, make a little crease. This is not, because I've given you extra, you don't have to be totally precise with this. I know some of you will want to be, but you really don't need to be, okay? Because I've given you extra to allow for any idiosyncrasies with your stitching, seam allowances, cutting, all of those things that sometimes we can go horribly wrong with. Right, so I've got a mark here, I've got a mark here, so we know that's our centre. And we're going to do right sides together. So let's just pop a pin in there. Okay, I've got my big quilting pins out. I don't normally use these. Anyway, there's our centre marked here. Now, we're only going to stitch obviously from here to here, but I want to stop 1/4 inch away from the end of my fabric. Now, ideally, I would do this on here, because this corner here is probably far more important than marking on here, okay? Because I'm definitely going to have to stop there. Now I can eyeball that as I'm stitching along, okay? So it's 1/4 inch in from both sides. That's where you're going to stop, and that's where you're going to start. So we're not going off the edge at any point with our stitching, okay? Now each one of these borders are done like this. So let's pin this so you can have a little bit of a visual. I'm going to get my regular pins in. And you know, these things, if you're using a walking foot, please, it'd be wonderful if you did, because it keeps all your fabrics lovely and flat. So I'm going to stitch from there to there, 1/4 inch in. I'm just going to flip that out of the way, and then I'm going to stitch on my long borders. Okay, so my long border will be attached as well. Don't forget, in this case, my fabric is going to the outside. And again, I'm just going to find the center of my long piece. So I shall fold my long piece of border in half, exactly what we did before. I'm going to finger press it, so I've got a center. I'm going to find the center of my long piece. You know, let's do it now so we're not confused with anything. Fold this over. There's no need to pull it and shove it about. You'll find pretty much your natural center, which is here. So it falls on this little pleat here. So let's just get that out the way. Oops. Let's put a pen mark on it. We know it's going to be on a seam because we're using inches and even numbers. So that's my center there. This is my long piece of border. Finger press the center. So this is going to be, you're going to do this on every single piece of the border, okay? We need it to face out, so let's put it so it faces out. There's my crease there. Let me make a mark, you might see it better. And then I'm just going to marry those pieces up. I don't care what goes on at this end here. This is going to be right sides together, pin. Just make sure your fabric is going the correct way. Give it a second look. And then when we come down to here, you'll find that this comes right off the edge, okay? And even when it's all stitched, it'll come right off the edge. And that's exactly how I want it to be. But you're only stitching up to that corner a 1/4 inch away. So when we machine this, we're going to machine all the way along. We're going to start a 1/4 inch in and finish a 1/4 inch before the end. And that's the same for all of these pieces. So I'm now going to go ahead and stitch all these together, and then I'll come back to you. So I'll see you in a minute. So I've stitched all the borders on. They're all sort of loose at the ends, if you like. So if I lift this up, you can see I've got 2 ends like this. This is not complicated, okay? So I want you to concentrate on what I'm doing on the overhead, and you'll crack this, no bother at all. You need a nice ruler that you've got a 45-degree line on, and you definitely need a pen and a couple of pins handy to hold those miters in place before you stitch. So let's have a look on the overhead. This is how it looks. So my ends look like this. So I've got a bit of an overhang here on my long edge, and I've got a nice overhang on my shorter edge, okay? And that's absolutely fine. I would say please don't cut back to exactly the amount. It just makes it a little bit more difficult for you. So what we need to do is to get these edges here, this one here and this one here, sitting on top of each other parallel. So I don't want you to think too hard about this. I want you to get this edge here, and I want you to shift it over to there, okay? And flip it over so it looks like this. So hold on to it, use a clip, pin it, whatever it takes, but you want those 2 raw edges to sit perfectly on top of each other, okay, which you've got now. So you're folding your panel diagonally, and in the pattern I say that, but I just want you to get a visual on that so you know exactly what I've done here. It's really important that you get all of these edges lined up. They want to be absolutely parallel, totally on top of each other. And if you want to, you could pop a pin in just to hold it in place, just to make sure that they sit straight. We'll take them out shortly because we don't really need them there to sort of get in the way. So let's just pin just to hold both these raw edges in place. You can see how that looks. Okay, so now we've got this beautiful stitching line going across here. This is the stitching line we just did with our panels. And what you'll have at the end of your stitching line, so if I was to get my pen and show you, there's a definite end to your stitching line here. Okay, so if I circle it, that's where you're going to be looking. So the end of your stitching is there, and that's that 1/4 inch mark that I told you about, and that's where we draw from with our ruler. So get your 45-degree angle running along your raw edges here. So that line, I don't know if you can see it, that definite 45-degree line is sitting parallel again with my raw edge along there. Okay, so we know that what we've got now is the perfect mitered corner. Can you see how beautiful that looks? It's all in line. You've got your straight line there. All of your fabrics are sitting on top of each other. What we want to do is draw a line from the end of that stitching, so I just need to move that a wee bit, across to this corner here, or this edge here I should say, that's going to be your corner, and draw yourself a lovely line so you've got a great visual on it. And you're going to stitch from that end of your stitching line here to here. You're not going to go the other way around. You want this to be perfect. I don't really mind what happens here. If things shift, they shift, we can trim. But I want that to look fairly decent. So we'll start stitching from that 1/4 inch mark, that end of stitching line there, right down to there. Now, you can see my line. And I will do this on every single corner, okay? I won't guess. I will do that every single time. So I'm going to bring some pins in, 3 pins, you'll see that in the pattern, and I'm going to just keep my fabric stable by pinning it. So now both my layers are pinned, they're secure. I just want to make sure that this is all happy here, that I haven't caught anything, everything is laying flat. I'm really happy with it, to be perfectly honest. And I'm going to stitch from that end of stitching line here down to here, and I'm going to do that on every single corner. When I've stitched that, I'm going to trim it back to a 1/4 inch. I'm not going to do that now. I'll stitch it, then I'll trim, and when I come back to you, I'll have done all 4, and all 4 will be trimmed, and you'll see how that looks. Okay, so I have put all the binding on, the 4 inch wide, 4.5 inch wide binding on. And what I've done here, if we look on the overhead, I have trimmed away the seams, and I've also pressed them open, or pressed them to one side. Now you could press these open if you want to, you can have it like that. I just push them to one side. To be perfectly honest, by the time you've got the wadding and the backing on, you're not going to notice whether they're open or closed. Try and keep your seams going in the way they want to go. So for the panel, they absolutely want to stay going out, so just make sure you press all that and make sure that all your seams are still going the way you want them to go. And that's our border done. So if you flip that over, you can see how that looks as a mitered corner. It looks absolutely gorgeous. I shouldn't worry about trying to match up your designs here. I mean, we've got rows of elephants here, rows of, you know what, I'm not going to see that once it's down on the floor, because this one's going on the floor. So you can see how the mitered corners look. You can trim this away if you want to, just to make it neat. I'll leave that for you to do and to neaten up. And then we're now going to apply the smaller width borders. Now with this one, normally I do top and bottom first, so I'd normally do these short ends first and then apply the long ends. Now because of the width of the piece, it's much easier if we do the long ends first, or the long sides first, and then apply the top, because of the width of the fabric. The width of the project, I mean, you're going to be using selvage to selvage strip to actually apply to this. So we're going to apply the long edge first. This isn't particularly directional, well it is, but the triangles are both going the same way, so I'm okay with that. And you're going to do right sides together. I'm not going to use my selvage, so I'll just trim that back. And we're going to do right sides down, and you're going to go right up to that edge there. You can see how that looks. If I bring it out, you can see. If you bring it back in, you can see. And you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along there. When you've completed the 2 long sides, you're then going to do top and bottom, the 2 short sides. So if we were to flip that back, that's how that looks. You're going to stitch it, press it so it looks like this, and then you're going to apply the short strips. I'll just cut the selvage off this end. Again, right sides together, so let's just keep that in place there. Right sides together, and you're going to stitch right across on the short ends like that. And in the pattern it tells you quite clearly how to do this next process. So you're going to stitch, we'll just reiterate, you're going to stitch the long sides first so it fits on your fabric and we have no joins, and then you're going to do top and bottom, all the short sides. Okay, so I'm going to start stitching that, and then I'll complete it and come back to you and show what it looks like. So I'll bring the machine in. This is actually quite a nice easy project, to be honest. It's just the pleating that's the tricky part, because you have to be quite accurate. So right sides together, I'm going to put my stitch onto 1/4 inch, so I know I've got that precisely. I'm not going to bother with a back stitch, just increasing my stitch length there. Make sure you're not pulling the fabrics, keep them nice and straight. Don't try to stretch them, otherwise your piece will buckle a little bit. And then when we get to this stage, we can give the whole thing a really good press. So you're just coming down, right down to the bottom. When you come down to the bottom, all you're doing is trimming your selvage or whatever. If you've already trimmed it, that's fine. You're just going to trim it so it fits nicely. And then we'll apply the short ends. So I'll just do this part. So it's right sides together. Be aware of directional fabric if you are using directional fabric. All the way down. I'll just trim a little bit of that. So I've got a couple of inches spare, which I could use for patchwork, some foundation paper piecing. So we've got our little triangle there, so I'm just going to snip that away. And just run off your fabric there. Okay, so I'm just going to trim that. So keep that flat like that and just trim that away. And then when I've done the other side, I'll press that open. I could trim that a bit better. Oh dear. There we are. Use a rotary cutter if you want to. So trim that away. You're going to then press that over once you've done the other side, and then you're going to apply your 2 short ends. And you'll find that your miter, once you've done your seam allowance, will fit beautifully into the corner of that. It looks really professional and neat and tidy. So I'll go ahead and I'll do the other side, and then I'll come back to you to show you what that looks like. So I have added the narrow borders, and I've given this a really good press, ready now for quilting. So if we look on the overhead, we'll just take one sort of section in particular, and you can see how that looks. I haven't pressed my pleats, I've just left them as is. You can see how that miter corner goes beautifully into my borders here, and now this is ready for putting the backing on and the wadding, which I've already got prepared. Now this has been designed, if you like, to take an exact ½ meter of backing fabric. So this is my backing fabric. I've already got it attached to my wadding. Now what I need to do now is to attach my panel, if you like, my outer piece, my main piece, to this backing here. So I've cut it to size pretty much. Unusual thing to do, because normally you would leave your backing and your wadding bigger than your project. So your backing and your wadding would be perhaps sort of this sort of size, a lot bigger. But because this is so precise, because the width of my project is so precise, I've cut it down to exactly the right size I need. So I've got my backing fabric on there, I've got my wadding. I'm going to use 505. You can use whatever temporary glue or fixtures that you want. You could use a glue gun, not, you know, like that does the plastic sort of pins, if you like. Whichever way you choose. You might want to use your quilting pins. You know, this is the time to do what you like to do. I like to spray baste. So you can see that it absolutely fits edge to edge, and you might need to sort of manipulate it about so it does fit edge to edge. You shouldn't need to trim it. It should fit well within a sort of a hair's breadth of the edge of that fabric, and by the time you put your binding on, as long as that wadding and backing fabric is within that 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're fine. So we'll just work our way along. So you'll find that it's quite a sort of a lengthy process to get this all beautifully flat. So you can see that just about fits on my 1/2 metre of fabric. Now this really does depend how well your fabric store cuts your fabric, because if they're mean, if they're really sort of stinted on your fabric, then you might be a little bit struggling. But you know what, I would just cut your backing, your topper, if you like, to fit. I really wouldn't worry too much. Make sure those seams are still laying flat. That one isn't flat at the moment. It is now. And just keep pulling it into shape, keep spreading it out, keep sort of pushing it down, making sure that that glue is attaching to your fabric. And then we're just working our way down the sides. So again, just roll back your topper. This is our backing, as you know. Get your glue on it. Don't need a huge amount. Just roll that down and spread that nicely. Make sure it's all stuck down. And the only quilting we're going to do is here and here. We're not quilting any of this. So all you're doing is you're going to be doing a line of stitching here and a line of stitching here. So it's super, super, super easy. So again, just pull that back and you'll feel it. It's stuck there. So you'll feel it. And again, just roll your piece over the top. Just make sure that it's at full capacity. So you're using all of that 1/2 metre. Just keep pressing it down, making sure it's nice and flat until we get to the bottom. Like that. You should have a little bit spare. So let's just... Right. So as you can see, that fits absolutely perfectly. So what I'll do is I'm going to flip this over now, and I'm going to just do what I'm doing now. Keep pushing it all out, keep spreading it out, making sure that it's fitting. You can see here how that's going to look. You know, it's a, like I say, it's a snug fit, but it's been deliberately measured so it'll fit on a 1/2 metre of fabric, or as long as your supplier has cut it correctly. And you can see it's a little bit out here, so I just want to check on my backing to make sure that it's all lying straight. So I'll go away and do that and I'll come back to you. So I have attached my backing, wadding and my topper together. So now I've got a lovely sandwich ready now for binding. My binding is the regular width of 2.5 inches. Got it all prepared here. It's the grey elephant to match, obviously. And we're going to just have a folded start or stop. So in other words, I'm not doing a mitered finish. With this project, I'm just doing a folded over edge. Now you can do your folded edge at the beginning or at the end. I think I always prefer it now at the end. So I start stitching about 2 inches from the end of my fabric. So let's just get my scissors and trim my selvage off. There we go. Now, to be honest, I have cut 4 complete selvage to selvage widths of fabric. I have given you a measurement, but at the end of the day, we need quite a bit of binding for this. So I've just done 4 widths of the fabric, and you know, we've got plenty of fabric in a 1/2 metre bundle to do that. So I'm happy with that. Whatever leftover I have always gets used for another project at some point. So there's never any wastage. So if you bring the machine in now, I'm going to start on a short end. You can start where you like, and all I'm going to do is offer my raw edges right sides together, sorry, my binding and my border, right sides together. All my raw edges are sitting there on the side here, and I'm going to start about here. So you can see I've got a little bit of a tail, and that's absolutely fine. I've got my machine set on 1/4 inch. I'm going to do one little back stitch there when my machine decides to do that. There we go. And we're going to miter the corners, so it's all going to be nice and neat, and you might all have different ways of doing this, and I'll just take you through one of my corners so you know what I do. And to be perfectly honest, I do chop and change that myself as well. So just coming down to this corner, which I haven't trimmed beautifully, so let's just trim that back a little bit so it's neat. I'm following my border rather than anything else. So if I'm seeing my wadding like just here, I'm just going to trim that away because I want to follow my border. I don't want to be distracted. So do trim, use your rotary cutter if you need to. And you can do this on the back and bring it over to the front, or you can do it the other way around. So I'm coming to the corner. I'm stopping 1/4 inch away from that corner. I'm turning my fabric at an angle, and I'm just coming off like that. So you end up with that sort of look coming off your fabric. And then we're going to fold it back. Make sure both my border and my binding, I have a continuous straight line. Put my thumb in there just to hold it. Flip it over so I've got a fold. Just make sure that's nice and neat. You can pop a clip in there or something if you want to hold that together just for a moment. So I've just flipped that like that, and then I'm just going to start stitching from that folded end there. Like I say, you all have different ways perhaps of doing this. This is what I do. So just make sure it's gone right up to that corner, and then start stitching again. So I'll continue with this all the way around until I come back to where I started. And just have a look, we've got our elephants. I mean, to be honest, there's going to be such a small amount. I was just thinking the direction of your fabric. Again, have a little think about that if that's important to you. Stripes are really good for a border. They kind of diffuse what you've done. It's like soft focus. Okay. So 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're just going all the way around, catching all your layers. Everything will be stuck, and you're good to go. So I'll carry on with that. I'll go all the way around, but I'll come back to you just before I finish that last little piece, just to show you what I do. So I'm just coming back to where I started, so I just thought I'd show you on the side camera what that looks like when I get to that part. So I've done my mitered corner. I'm just turned the corner here, so all I'm going to do is come along to where I've started, which is just back here. Again, keeping to my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm getting so far, so maybe an inch and a half away. Okay, so I'll stop there. So you can see this is where I started here, and I'm going to just trim that back a little bit just to make it nice and neat. I'll just lay that down like that. With this one, it's unfortunate I've got a mitered join here, but I'll work with that, that's no bother. If I find that too cumbersome, I can fold this in 1/2 inch and tuck this inside, but we'll do it the other way around because that's how I like to do it. So I'm just going to cut that back a bit. So I'm overlapping now probably about maybe 1 1/4 inches, something like that. You can see how that looks. And I'm just going to fold this in a nice 1/2 inch, a nice easy achievable fold. 1/4 inch sometimes is a little bit too small. So I'm just finger pressing that with my nail. I want you to have a look at what I've done. So I've just folded that in, and then put your binding back together again so your raw edges meet, and just give that again another finger press because you've adjusted the folds there. So now I've got an end that's really nice and neat. You can see what that looks like. So we're just going to tuck this end inside that. Now this is where you might want your pokey tool. Here we go. Or your stiletto, whichever's easiest. And you want to make sure that all your raw edges are sitting exactly where you want them to be. So your folded piece wants to be right on the edge here. Your end or your start piece that's being tucked in, you want the raw edges sitting nicely there, and then just fold that over as well, so all of those raw edges are sitting beautifully together. You might need to make sure that your starting tail sits nice and flat, but there we are, that's that done. So all we need to do now is to continue our stitching. You might want to use a pin and just hold that in place, but when I get a little bit nearer, I'll get my stiletto in there, keep everything lying flat, and then just go over my initial stitches by, I don't know, 4 or 5, just to secure. So there we are, you can see what that looks like. So there's our fold here. Now you might want to pop a little bit of glue in there or hand stitch that to make sure that that stays secure. Let's just, if I've got my glue handy, which of course I haven't. Oh, I've got my quilter's tape. So maybe a little piece of quilter's tape just in there to hold all of those layers together, because as soon as you flip this binding over, this join, if you like, will want to move. So I'm just going to pop that in there. Let's get my pokey tool. Obviously you could do this before. So just pop that in. Let's try and do this so you can see it. Well, that glue has already come off, so I might as well just take that backing away. Move that glue in place. This is all going on the inside, so even if you leave that glue there, nobody's going to see it. And just pop that in and then squidge it down, and now that won't move. But you could use wet glue, or you could just put a little hand stitching in there just to hold all that together. And then all you're going to do then is to flip the whole thing over to the back as you normally would, and then you're just going to hand stitch that binding over. So what I'll do is I'll flip all mine over and use my clips to hold it, and then I'll show you what that looks like, and then at some point I'll go away and hand stitch that. I love the elephants there, really sweet. Okay, so I have flipped the binding over to the back, ready to either machine stitch or hand stitch. It's very trendy now to actually do a decorative embroidery stitch on the back as well now, but it's ready now for that process. But everything has been flipped over to the back, and this is what it looks like. Obviously I haven't hand stitched it yet, or whatever I've decided to do. So that's what it looks like. And that's our kind of regular fabric Joel, because if you remember, this is like the Christmas themed sort of videos, if you like, of the year. So the one that we made is obviously with the Christmas fabrics, all finished, all pressed and looking gorgeous. And this is our Joel here. So you can tell by the video it's not difficult. Once you have done all of your strips, that's the main thing, and that you've pressed everything nice and neatly as you've gone along. If I turn the back over, you'll see where I've quilted. You'll see the lines. Let me show you. See if I can. There we go. So you can see that the lines of stitching are literally on that wide border, and I've gone all the way around, and that's all I've done. So that's basically it completed. So with this one I've used a lovely stripy border. It looks quite striking, doesn't it? But this is traditionally my July Christmas pattern, along with the Santa gnomes. There's cushions there, which are a lot more complicated than this. But I do hope you give it a go. I'm going to use this as a floor mat because it's just crying out for that. I love the little elephants on there, and yeah, the giraffes and the lions. It's fantastic. You can obviously use whatever fabric you like. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you make at least one.